What's up, YouTube? It's Firewood splitting story time tonight. And today's subject, and the question is, and all the accomplishments that he did, how did he make those happen? You know, obviously there's a sense of evil in him, and you know, not caring, and being ruthless, and being fixated on power and whatnot. I mean, that's a simple explanation on a personal level, but I'm going to talk about how he did it, you know, when you look at it on paper, when you look at the history of everything, and, you know, how it started, and, you know, why he felt these ways, and why he wanted to achieve the things that he wanted to achieve. So I'm just going to tighten up the chain quickly, and then we're going to go over to a pile of sugar maple, and we're going to buzz that up, and then I'm going to start breaking it down with the 6-pound Garant maul axe. Choke, start button, pull. Okay, so where it all starts is when Hitler was young. His father, Adolf Hitler, and the last name of the Hitler family was Schicklgruber. So it wasn't Hitler originally. Where's the axe? There it is. So his father worked for the postal company at the time, and his father died when he was young. I can't remember what age, but then he was left with his mother, and his mother got sick, and he was trying to give her all these ailments, and he might have ended up poisoning her in the end. So anyways, he lost his mother, and you know, that was a tough break because both his parents are gone now, and he really adored his mother. His mother really loved him. He was an only child from this mother. He had at least one brother. I think he had maybe, was it 2 or just 1? I can't remember. So after school, or after school age, Hitler realized he wanted to be an artist. He wanted to be an artist. So he signed up for the Arts Academy in Vienna, Austria. Unfortunately, he didn't make it in. And he was good at architecture. And this point will come up later. So he was kind of living on the streets, and some say that he was involved in prostitution. So now World War I comes along, and Hitler joins the German army. This one's a tough one, but it's going. So he made it to the rank of corporal, and he was basically a messenger on the front lines. He had to run back and forth and deliver messages. But then late in the war, there was a nerve gas attack, and Hitler got injured and was blinded by the gas attack. Now in World War I, there's a lot of fighting for no ground, and lots of men dying for, you know, not much gain at all. So the Germans were really upset because they were in this war and they weren't ready to give up, but the top brass surrendered. So they were very upset about that position, and so Hitler's laying there in a hospital bed recovering, and he's so upset about what's going on with the war and how it ended. So a lot of people started getting really upset with the ex-army officials, and there was a lot of political turmoil in Germany at the time. Hitler's job, he got a job where he was supposed to surveil a certain political party. And that party was the National Socialists. But as Hitler began to listen to what they're saying, he started realizing he had a lot of the same ideas. So then he ended up joining the National Socialist Party. And then he became the leader. And that's when he realized his ability to public speak. Tensions got worse. And the National Socialist Party plotted a coup. Now that ended in failure. And they even had generals at the front line from the army in the march. And they were shot at. And Hitler was injured himself too. And then there was a trial. And then they were convicted and went to the jail, which is basically like a little private house for Hitler, and you know, he developed some friends there, and that's kind of where he started his second political attempt. Now when he was in the trial, Hitler actually kind of got off easy overall because he had some good points, and he really moved the crowd with what he was saying. So the proceedings of the court kind of went in his favor, even though he had to go to jail still. But anyway, now, so he serves his term and he gets out, and then he starts things back up again. So he began running for power in Germany. And he lost a number of elections. He lost, like, what was it? Was it 3 or something like that? 3 or 4? But he kept trying. And as he moved up the ranks, things were just coming into his favor. One of them being that Hindenburg, his time was coming up, and he was a little bit reluctant to sign Hitler into power because Hitler had to depend on him. I can't remember the exact details, but Hitler just had one last thing in his way of becoming Chancellor of Germany. That's after he won the elections and he came into power. He was already in power, but Hindenburg was still up at the top. So then Hitler became Chancellor in was it January 1933. And then a month later, he set up a false flag and went and said, look, the traitors have went and burned the Reichstag down, the German parliament building. So I'm missing some footage, but long story short, in this gap, Hitler burned down the Reichstag. He began annexing countries surrounding Germany without interference by the British. In September of 39, he invaded Poland, and at the same time Russia did. And when they met in the middle of the country, they signed a pact saying that they wouldn't interfere with each other. But then Hitler deceived Stalin and put out info that there was going to be a plot to assassinate. So Stalin had all the top brass arrested and executed, rendering his army weak. So when Hitler invaded Russia, Stalin didn't even believe it. And then finally, after some time realizing what happened, Stalin did, give the order to go out and counter these attacks. But he was so embarrassed about what happened that he just went and hid himself. Some of the top brass for Russia who came in to go meet him, and he said he thought they were coming in to kill him. It's amazing that guy has that fear because he didn't show it overall. That guy was so cold when the Germans caught his son later on in the war. He called him up and said, look, we have your son. He said, I have no son. So Stalin just went and hid himself away. And then he came out of his hiding, and he came in with fervor, and he came in with strength, and he said, we got to defeat these Germans. That's jumping forward a little bit, but now Russia and Poland, and Germany in Poland as well. So now Hitler's invaded Russia with 3.5 million men, with 3 army groups: Army Group South, North, and Army Group Center. And this is where Hitler bungled everything. I'm jumping too forward, actually. We got to talk about France, because France was in 1940 and Hitler didn't invade Russia until 1941, June 22nd. So in May of 1940, Hitler went and launched the invasion of France. There's a big story behind this because of what happened in World War I, whereas Germany was fighting France. So there's a lot of history behind there for people to be upset, So Hitler invades France, and he's got the blitzkrieg machine. He's got the, the tank moving forward and the fast vehicles to go in and cut through the enemy lines and then actually surround them too. So they'd send troops all around and just surround the enemy. That's what they did. It was a new tactic that France wasn't used to. France was used to sitting in the trenches. So that's how their army was trained. So 6 weeks they took over France. And the French, they abandoned the city of Paris. They didn't defend Paris because they didn't want to destroy it. And Hitler, he loved Paris. So he didn't want to destroy the city. So when the invasion was over, Hitler came himself and did a whole propaganda film showing him walking around and admiring Paris and the Eiffel Tower. So they're confident they would beat France. And then there was England. And Hitler didn't actually want to have a war with England. Hitler was good with the royals. And one of them was kind of excommunicated from the British royal family. Was it Prince Edward? Because he was a friend of Hitler. So Hitler actually invaded a piece of British property in Operation Sea Lion. And they invaded this island and they took it over for a bit. And they did some aerial bombing of England and certain targets. And then tensions grew because the Germans dropped a bomb on London itself. So that really angered the Brits. They went and sent planes to go bomb to bomb Berlin. And that basically changed the course of the war in terms that Hitler was bombing all the British planes and they were shooting them down. And the Brits were taking heavy losses, and they couldn't sustain those losses. And if they had kept going for 2 weeks and Germany kept bombing and shooting the planes out of the sky, Britain would have lost air superiority. And then there was a stalemate, whereas there was no fighting. And the Germans called it the Sitzkrieg, because Sitz stands for sit, right? So instead of Blitzkrieg, they called it the Sitzkrieg. And then the Brits had to evacuate Dunkirk in, I believe it was late 1940. And they evacuated 350,000 men, and that was it for any of the Allies on the continent of Europe, or on the mainland. So Hitler's defeated France. He's now rushing into Russia, and he's making good progress. And he's kept England at bay. And then Japan, which is Hitler's ally, goes and bombs Pearl Harbor. Hitler goes and declares war on the United States. Now the thing is with Hitler was he was too obsessed with the successes, and you know, I'm just talking a little bit of history there, but let's get back to exactly, you know, why Hitler was doing what he was doing and why he got to where he was. Because things just kept going in his favor. You know, he wasn't getting held back, he was winning wars, he's annexing countries, he's deceiving the enemy, and he's outsmarting them. Another reason why Hitler thought that he was given a green card was that Providence was what kept him going. There was 41 assassination attempts on Hitler's life. And the one we know about most was with the Tom Cruise movie Valkyrie. And that's when Colonel Stauffenberg and a bunch of generals and military brass, they plotted to kill Hitler. Even Rommel, who headed up the 6th Army, who defeated France. And he was the general in the North African campaign across the Mediterranean against the British. He was the head general of the Atlantic Wall when D-Day happened. And why D-Day kind of bungled was because Hitler was in bed sleeping, because he's an artist, you know, so he's living the artist kind of lifestyle, you know, getting up late in the afternoon and going out and walking his dog, and then dealing with all that he had to deal with. And then Rommel was away because it was his wife's birthday. Nobody wanted to wake Hitler up, so that really gave an advantage to the Allies when they invaded the beaches at D-Day. Shortly after D-Day, about a month and a half, they set up this plan where they're going to put a bomb in the plane that Hitler's going on, but the bomb didn't go off. Actually, that was months before. So then now comes around, and Stauffenberg has a meeting with Hitler at the Waldschanze, which is the German high command, or sorry, the German headquarters in Prassenburg in East Prussia. So it was the middle of July, so it was really hot, and instead of holding the meeting in the bunker, which is, you know, which is thousands and thousands of cubic meters of concrete, because Hitler was obsessed with these bunkers when the Allies were doing their bombing campaigns. So instead of holding it in there where it was hot, they held it in the summer cottage outside of the bunker. And the briefcase with the bomb was put in the room, and Stauffenberg went to exit. And then someone saw the briefcase, and they went and they moved it, and they actually put it on the other side of one of the table legs for the big oak table. So when the blast went off, that's actually what saved Hitler from getting a lot of damage. And also too, because they were in a summer cottage, the blast was allowed to go out of the windows, right? And if it had been in the bunker, then it surely would have killed a lot of the brass that were in there. The plot failed because, you know, Hitler didn't die. They even had Hitler, Stauffenberg earlier in the war, he had Hitler sign an order to prevent against a government coup by any of the other, by anybody else. So he used this to mobilize troops so that they can go and arrest top German staffers like Goebbels and Goering, Heinrich Himmler, Ribbentrop, Otto Skorzeny, all the brass. So they actually had where these people were getting arrested. And they were wondering what the hell is going on. You know, we're some of the top people here, and why are we getting arrested? Well, then the word got out that Hitler was alive, and it started going against the whole plan. To whereas they went to arrest Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, and they sent the army staff, the head of the contingent, up to go and talk to him and take him into custody. So he said, I have on the phone someone I want to speak to. So he takes up the phone, and then it's Hitler himself. He says, do you hear my voice? Do you recognize me? And I'm sure the gulp in his throat was the biggest gulp ever heard on earth. And then so they're all caught. They had a kangaroo court, and all the conspirators, they strung them up with piano wire, hung them. But this time now Hitler's paranoid, and he failed to see that he was failing, because the war went bad in Russia, namely with Stalingrad, which is 2,000 kilometers from Berlin, with stretched supply lines. The Russians launched a counteroffensive with 1 million men, and they surrounded the Germans inside the city of Stalingrad, and then they defeated them. And that's the first time that a field marshal had surrendered since 1870. So that's very upsetting, and Hitler kept bragging that, you know, the army had Stalingrad, but they didn't. So then now the tide turns against them. Stalin is sending his troops westward towards Germany. The Allies have invaded the mainland in France during D-Day. So now you got two major fronts coming in, closing in on Germany. And even though the odds were against him, Hitler thought that he was going to take care of the situation. And then by the end of it, in his delusions, he thought there was one army that would be able to group up and come in and fend off the Russian invasion, because the Allies actually held back from Berlin and they let the Russians take Berlin. And that's where Hitler really lost it. You know, he developed a tremor. They said he had Parkinson's, and he's pretty paranoid and, you know, living in this delusion that he'd still win the war. But then finally, one of the last days, he admitted that the war was over. And there's actually a good movie done in German called The Downfall, or Der Untergang, which describes, or which depicts what happened in the last 10 days of the war. And the first day of the 10 days is Hitler's birthday. And that's when they heard bombing just outside in the suburbs of Berlin. The Russian artillery was bombing the suburbs. And the Germans were helpless because they lost the air superiority October or November, late 1944, and the Germans had to do all their production underground or in mountains. They had to basically hide. That's why they started putting all the branches and the brush all over their tanks towards the end of the war, because all the Allied planes that were bombing. So Hitler kind of set him up for his own demise, because he had done so well in the past, and he thought the future was his. And going back to what I was saying about Hitler and architecture, he actually designed a new city of Berlin called Germania, which had a stadium with a huge dome. Like, this dome was massive. Like, even today, this building would be considered massive. And he had this all planned out, and he had his architect, Albert Speer,
who was also the armaments minister towards the end of the war, and who ramped up production of armaments later in the war. He did a real good job at that. But anyways, Speer, he designed this city that Hitler would just go and gloat over. He had this model of the city in his office, and he just go and gloat over it and think about how he's gonna make this happen. And they did start this construction, but the problem is the war was taking too much money out of that project. So anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the story. I'll see you next time. So like, subscribe, share, comment, and all that good stuff.